You were probably used to hearing about artificial intelligence as, just a software update, a smarter way to sort your inbox, or maybe a faster tool for drafting reports.
Right, or just the engine behind the latest consumer tech hype.
Exactly. But if you look at the raw data and the closed-door briefings circulating right now in 2025 and 2026, you realize that framing is, well, it's entirely obsolete.
It really is.
The most powerful tool on Earth isn't sitting in a missile silo anymore. It's humming inside these heavily guarded server farms. We're not just talking about software. We are talking about the foundational architecture of global power.
Yeah, and to understand the reality of this landscape, you really have to throw out the idea that AI is just an engineering challenge, being solved by a few tech companies.
Right.
The sources we're diving into today, so we've got detailed analyses from the Atlantic Council, reports from the RAND Corporation, and some really hard data from the Stanford AI Index. And they paint a very different picture.
A much more intense picture.
Exactly. They show a geopolitical war room. I mean, every major superpower is scrambling to control the underlying infrastructure of AI because they know that whoever controls the compute essentially controls the future of economic dominance and national security.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the premise here, it completely redefines how we need to view the news cycle. This isn't a story about what a chatbot can write for you.
No, not at all.
It's about what happens at the really high-stakes negotiation tables in Washington, Beijing, and Brussels. And we want to cut through the daily information overload for you and get straight to the mechanics of this global chess game.
And the best way to map this out, at least according to the sources, is to look at what geopolitical analysts are currently calling the three-way split.
The three-way split.
Yeah. The global tech landscape is basically being driven by three distinct runners, the US, China, and Europe. And what's fascinating here is that they aren't using the same playbook.
Not even close, right?
Right. They are running with fundamentally different strategies, governed by different philosophies, and they're aiming at entirely different finish lines.
So let's start with the United States. Reading through these think tank reports, the U.S. strategy is aggressively labeled as innovation first. But I want to get into the mechanics of what that actually looks like, on the ground.
Well, on the ground, it looks like just an unprecedented mobilization of private capital. I mean, according to that Stanford AI Index data we reviewed, the U.S. is projected to see approximately $286 billion in private AI investment in 2025 alone.
$286 billion. That's almost hard to comprehend.
It is. And that sheer volume of capital, it creates this localized gravitational pull. It allows private tech giants, companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, to build what analysts call frontier models.
And these are the massive ones, right?
Exactly. These are models pushing the absolute bleeding edge of computing. We're talking trillions of parameters requiring literal gigawatts of electricity just to train. And the U.S. government's role, especially accelerated by the Cheats-Peats Act, has essentially been to pour the concrete for the infrastructure and then just let the private market run as fast as physics will allow.
See, but I have to push back a little on the long-term viability of that approach.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't outsourcing national security and technological supremacy to private CEOs?
Yeah.
Isn't that incredibly precarious?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you have the U.S. government essentially hoping that the goals of these massive tech conglomerates, who, let's be real, ultimately answer to shareholders and venture capitalists, that those goals will perfectly align with the geopolitical interests of the state. It just seems like a recipe for internal fragmentation. Like you have different companies building competing walled-off ecosystems rather than one unified national front.
Well, yeah, and what's fascinating here is that you've identified the exact structural vulnerability of the American strategy that the reports highlight. Yeah. The U.S. heavily leads in the measurable impact of its scientific AI breakthroughs. The market-driven approach is, objectively speaking, faster at pure innovation.
Sure, because of the competition.
Right. However, the bottleneck is control. I mean, in a state-directed system, if the government decides the entire tech sector needs to pivot towards, say, optimizing drone logistics rather than consumer chatbots, they just issue a mandate.
Right, they just order it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., the government has to rely on defense contracts, complex incentives, and, heavy negotiation. So the U.S. has built the most powerful engine on Earth, but the federal government doesn't actually have its hands completely on the steering wheel.
Which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
And that structural reality provides a really sharp contrast to the second major player in this landscape, China.
Right.
Their approach is defined in the reports as an AI plus state strategy. So they're utilizing a highly centralized, state-led integration. But the data point that really caught my eye was their publication volume.
Oh, yeah, the Stanford Index numbers.
Yes. The index notes that China accounted for roughly 36% of global scientific AI publications recently. And rather than locking their most advanced models behind a private paywall like the U.S. companies do, they're aggressively pushing them out into the world.
This is a really critical mechanism to understand. China is executing an open weight strategy with models like DeepSeek and Moonshot Kimi K3.
Okay, let's clarify that for a second. Open weight versus open source.
Yeah, so traditional open source software means you give away the underlying code so anyone can read it and tinker with it. But open weight goes a massive step further in the AI context.
How so?
Well, the weights of an AI model are the mathematical connections, the billions of tuned parameters that required literally tens of millions of dollars in raw computing power to actually calculate.
Okay.
So by releasing an open weight model, China isn't just giving away the blueprints. They're giving away the fully assembled, highly expensive engine for free.
But why? I mean, why would a superpower give away its most expensive technological advancements?
Yeah.
That sounds entirely counterintuitive if you're trying to win a global geopolitical race.
Well, because the goal isn't just to build the smartest computer in some isolated lab. The goal is to build a digital Silk Road. Think about it. When China offers a highly capable, open-weight AI model to a developing nation in Latin America or Africa, they're removing this immense financial barrier to entry.
Right.
They're essentially saying to them, hey, don't pay exorbitant licensing fees to American tech monopolies. Build your national infrastructure, your smart cities, your logistics networks, all on our foundation.
Wow. So the mechanism there is dependency.
Exactly.
If an emerging economy builds its electrical grid optimization or, say, its hospital data management on a Chinese open-weight architecture,
Yeah,
they become permanently locked into that ecosystem.
they absolutely do.
Because then they start using Chinese data formatting, Chinese API standards, and eventually they're going to need Chinese hardware to run it all efficiently.
Precisely. They are building geopolitical reliance by making themselves the default nervous system for the developing world. So they are closing the overall capability gap with the U.S. not by trying to outspend them on a single frontier model, but by ensuring their technology achieves massive, immediate global adoption.
That is incredibly strategic. Which brings us to the third philosophy in this global dynamic, and that's Europe.
Europe is a whole different ballgame.
Right. When you dive into the European approach in these reports, they are heavily focused on the AI Act and initiatives like Invest AI. Their primary objective seems to be establishing verifiable trust, protecting digital human rights, and maintaining what they call strategic autonomy.
Yeah, the European thesis operates on the idea that an industry without guardrails eventually just collapses under the weight of its own externalities.
Right.
They're looking at the integration of AI into critical infrastructure, banking, healthcare, aviation, and they're betting that global markets will eventually demand strict, verifiable safety standards.
So they want to be the ones to set those standards.
Exactly. Europe's strategy is leveraging the Brussels effect. Because their consumer market is so massive, multinational companies are forced to comply with European regulations if they want to do business there.
Right. You can't just ignore Europe.
Right. So Europe is trying to win the race by writing the rule book that both the U.S. and China will eventually have to follow just to maintain market access.
Okay, let me see if I can map this out mechanically with an analogy. It's almost like the global construction of a new planetary electrical grid.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So the U.S. is privatizing the power plants. They're letting venture capital build massive fusion reactors that run at absolute maximum voltage.
Yep.
Then China is manufacturing standardized transformers and just giving them away for free to the global south, ensuring that the world's grid runs on their specific wattage.
Exactly.
And Europe is sitting in the center, aggressively writing the universal fire and safety codes that dictate exactly how thick the insulation on every wire has to be.
That analogy maps perfectly to the technical realities, but, it also highlights the inherent risk in Europe's strategy.
How so?
Well, you can write the most comprehensive safety codes in the world, but if you don't own the power plants and you don't manufacture the transformers, your leverage is actually severely limited.
Right, because you're just writing rules for things other people make.
Exactly. And that leads directly to the core friction point of 2026. Because having different philosophies on software and regulation is one thing, but none of these strategies function without the raw physical materials.
The ultimate bottleneck. We're talking about hardware.
Yeah.
Specifically, compute power and microchips. Because, I mean, you can't train an AI model on philosophy. You need GPUs, graphics processing units.
Yeah, and we need to explain why GPUs are the specific choke point here.
Yeah, please do.
So traditional computer processors, CPUs, they are brilliant at doing complex tasks sequentially, one after another, very quickly. But training a neural network requires doing millions of very simple mathematical operations simultaneously. GPUs were originally designed to render millions of pixels on a screen all at once, which makes their architecture absolutely perfect for parallel processing. The entire global AI race relies entirely on the mass production of the most advanced GPUs.
And this is exactly where the U.S. has deployed its most aggressive geopolitical weapon, right? Export controls.
Yep.
The think tank reports detail how Washington has actively restricted China's access to the most advanced hardware, like the NVIDIA H200 chips. And the mechanism of how they do this is fascinating.
It's all about intellectual property.
Exactly. The U.S. doesn't just stop American companies from shipping boxes. They leverage IP law. Because the software used to design these chips, or the incredibly complex lithography machines built in the Netherlands that are used to print them, they rely on American patents. So the U.S. government can essentially enforce a global embargo. They are systematically attempting to starve China's AI infrastructure of the necessary compute power.
Right. But a nation-state with the resources of China doesn't just capitulate when they're cut off from a supply chain, right? They restructure.
They pivot.
Exactly. The sources show a massive pivot in Beijing toward hardware self-sufficiency. They are pouring astronomical sums into developing domestic lithography and chip manufacturing.
But they also have a massive counter-leverage point, right?
Yeah, they do. Their dominance over rare earth elements, we're talking minerals like gallium and germanium. The U.S. might control the intellectual property and the design of the microchip, but China controls the physical dirt required to actually manufacture it.
It is literally a high-stakes standoff over the periodic table.
It really is.
And the asymmetries, they don't just stop at hardware. They extend to data and human capital, too. I mean, for decades, the U.S. strategy relied on drawing the brightest engineering minds globally to Silicon Valley.
Right.
But the geopolitical analyses point out that tightening migration policies and just rising global tensions are choking that talent pipeline.
Yeah, and while the U.S. struggles with that, China has an insurmountable structural advantage when it comes to data.
Because of their population size.
Population size, yes, over 1 billion people, but also a drastically different regulatory environment regarding digital privacy.
Right, way fewer restrictions.
Exactly. They possess a domestic data pool that allows for rapid, massive-scale training on real human behavior that the U.S. just can't legally replicate.
Okay, so when you look at these diverging paths, you have the U.S. enforcing export controls on hardware, China dominating data and raw materials while pushing alternative software ecosystems, and Europe erecting these stringent regulatory walls. You start to see a physical manifestation of these policies in the internet itself.
Yeah, it's fracturing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we are basically witnessing the death of the global internet as we know it. For most of our lives, the digital world was presumed to be a singular, interconnected fabric. But the mechanics of this AI race are creating what analysts are now calling the splinternet.
The splinternet. It's the fragmentation of the global digital ecosystem into deeply incompatible technological stacks.
So it's not just like different websites being blocked by a firewall.
No, it is happening at the foundational API level.
Let's ground this for you listening at home, because this isn't just some abstract theory for diplomats. If you run a logistics company in Latin America and you adopt a highly efficient Chinese-built AI system to route your cargo ships,
you might have a huge problem.
Right. You might suddenly find that your software literally cannot interface with the automated port systems in Los Angeles or Rotterdam. The data protocols will be firewalled off by national security mandates.
Yep.
So the global supply chain, which relies entirely on frictionless digital communication, faces catastrophic routing failures simply because the underlying AI architectures are restricted from talking to each other.
Yeah, you're looking at a future where global commerce requires businesses to essentially maintain two completely separate, redundant digital infrastructures.
Wow.
It just depends on which sphere of the splinternet they are interacting with on any given day. The economic friction this introduces is just staggering.
So what does this all mean? I mean, If the internet fractures and these superpowers continue accelerating their development, just outpace each other, what are the tangible consequences for global stability?
Well, this is where it gets pretty dark.
Yeah, because when you read the RAND reports regarding military applications, the tone abruptly shifts from economic competition to existential risk.
The defining concept here is dual-use AI.
Dual use.
Right. Unlike a nuclear centrifuge, which has very specific, easily identifiable components, AI is fundamentally ambiguous.
Meaning it can be used for anything.
Exactly. A highly advanced logistical model designed to perfectly route civilian supply chains through, say, severe weather events.
Right.
Well, that can be instantly repurposed to route military supply lines during an invasion.
Right.
A drone navigation system meant for agricultural monitoring can just as easily become the brain of an autonomous weapons system. The civilian technology and the military technology are practically indistinguishable until the exact moment of deployment.
And the military advantage is absolute, because an autonomous defense system can analyze battlefield data, track thousands of variables, and execute tactical decisions in literal milliseconds.
Orders of magnitude faster than any human command structure could ever process.
Exactly.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this dual-use reality creates a textbook game theory scenario. It's a devastating prisoner's dilemma.
Walk us through the mechanics of that dilemma. Why can't these nations just sit down and agree to a safety framework?
Because of the verification problem.
Okay, what's that?
Well, think about the Cold War. We could send international inspectors to count nuclear warheads or verify that a missile silo was empty.
Right, you can physically see a missile.
Exactly. You cannot verify an AI model. A superpower could easily agree to a global pause on advanced AI development on paper while secretly training a massive weaponized model in a subterranean server farm disguised as a civilian data center.
Wow. So because neither Washington nor Beijing can mathematically prove that the other is actually slowing down to implement safety guardrails, they just have to assume the worst.
They have no other choice.
The U.S. military assumes that if they pause for alignment testing, China will covertly push forward and gain an unbeatable tactical advantage. And China looks at the U.S. private sector and makes the exact same assumption.
And the resulting logic is terrifying. I mean, both sides recognize that rushing the development of highly complex, unaligned AI systems risks catastrophic accidents and loss of control.
Right. They know it's dangerous.
They do, but because the fear of losing national sovereignty to a technologically superior adversary is absolute, accelerating development, basically bypassing safety protocols entirely, becomes the only rational tactical choice.
They're locked in a race to the bottom.
Exactly. A race where the most dangerous path is perceived as the only path to survival.
That brings up a critical question regarding the vast majority of the world that isn't sitting in Washington, Beijing, or Brussels. How does this zero-sum game impact the global south?
It puts them in a very tough spot.
The sources frequently highlight emerging tech players. Nations like India, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and massive economies across Latin America. And these countries are actively seeking digital sovereignty.
Right. They don't just want to be consumers.
Exactly. They're building their own models, like the Falcon model in the UAE.
But the challenge for these nations is the crushing cost of compute. Training a sovereign frontier model requires billions of dollars in hardware and massive, massive energy resources.
Right.
So these emerging powers are faced with a brutal strategic choice. If they align exclusively with the U.S. tech stack, they get access to the most advanced hardware.
But
But it is astronomically expensive, it's heavily restricted by U.S. export controls, and it leaves them entirely dependent on American policy shifts.
And then on the other side of the table, you have China offering their AI plus infrastructure. They're offering to build out the 5G networks, the smart cities, and the logistical AI at a fraction of the cost.
But, as we discussed, that digital bargain comes with the strings of the digital Silk Road. Adopting that infrastructure integrates your national data directly into the Chinese technological ecosystem.
So for the global south, this really isn't about ideological alignment at all. It is a precarious, highly calculated balancing act.
Yeah, absolutely is.
They're attempting selective collaboration, buying at American chips where they can, leveraging open-weight Chinese models to bootstrap their own developers, and basically playing the superpowers off one another to avoid getting completely swallowed by either side of the splinter net.
It is a staggering geopolitical tightrope they're walking.
It really is. Which brings us to the core takeaway that surfaces across all these think tank analyses. Amidst all the discussions of export controls and autonomous weapons and a fractured internet, The sources constantly return to the fundamental purpose of this technology.
Yeah, we have to remember why these models are being built in the first place. I mean, we're looking at architecture capable of designing novel proteins to cure diseases, optimizing global energy grids to dramatically reduce carbon emissions, and unlocking levels of scientific discovery that are just currently beyond human cognition.
Right.
The overwhelming consensus in these reports is that in the short term, if this race devolves into outright conflict or economic sabotage, no one wins.
No one. If the U.S. successfully crushes China's tech economy, or if China successfully fractures Western digital alliances, the resulting instability means humanity as a whole loses out on the profound shared benefits of the technology.
Exactly.
The true victory isn't absolute dominance by one superpower. The true victory is establishing a cooperative framework that mitigates the existential risks of weapon proliferation, solves that verification problem, and actually delivers the scientific benefits to the public.
And that requires an unprecedented level of diplomatic maturity. The geopolitical board we are currently playing on is incredibly fragile, and the pieces are moving faster than our traditional institutions can even track them.
Which raises an important question, and it's a final thought I want you to mull over today as you look at the news cycle.
Yeah.
We discussed the prisoner's dilemma, the reality that nations feel strategically forced to accelerate AI development, bypassing safety, simply to survive.
Mm-hmm.
If slowing down means risking your national security, and the pressure to maintain an absolute tactical advantage is the driving force of 2026, what happens when the tactical calculations become too complex and the required reaction times become too fast for human leaders to physically process?
That's the real question.
We might be rapidly racing toward a threshold where a superpower, terrified of a microsecond delay in a crisis, feels forced to integrate its geopolitical strategy and its defensive trigger systems directly into an autonomous AI. If the ultimate objective of this global race is rapid, flawless dominance, we have to ask what happens when the players moving the chess pieces are no longer human. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. As the landscape continues to shift, remember to look past the surface-level hype, question the underlying mechanics of the technology you use every day, and stay curious. We will catch you next time.